everyone. So my name is Nadia Mahmood and welcome to MentorMeet Stories. Here we speak with expert coaches who share their knowledge, experience and practical tips to help others grow and succeed in their fields. So today we're joined by Dr. Joanna Bagniewska, an Oxford-based academic, award-winning presenter, ecologist, science communicator and co-author of The Communicating Scientist. And the topic of discussion is what makes communication effective, and in Joanna's own words, the subtle art of connecting with an audience. So welcome, Joanna.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure.
It's great to have you here. So we both actually come from a science background, and I'm really interested in how you've developed your approach to communication. So a little bit of background. So I myself have come from a lab-based science to client-facing work, where you have to communicate complex and technical solutions. So I'm especially curious to hear your insights on how you help scientists communicate more effectively and what we can all learn from this.
Yeah, so I think it's always the initial surprise of why would a scientist tell me how to communicate? I mean, scientists are not famously known for excellent communication. I mean, the two of us clearly are, but the rest, not generally the stereotype you associate with scientists. But from my own background, as you mentioned, I'm an ecologist. I've been working as an academic for 12 years or so now. But at some point along my academic path, I also started doing communication and public engagement at Oxford University's Department of Pediatrics. So it was part of my professional life. Doing science communication was something that I would observe on a daily basis. I would see how scientists are keen to talk to the publics that are out there and how they're not too keen. And on the basis of that, I was able to produce a number of kind of tips and tricks that I later on implemented. And I still do implement when I have training sessions with my graduate students or with other external people. And that's also what ended up being in my book, The Communicating Scientist.
Yeah, so it's a great segue into your book, actually. So, I mean, I guess you've briefly explained what inspired you to write the book. What was the process like of writing the book?
So this one was really interesting because it all started with with my friend Ola Bergman, who is the first author of the book. It was his idea to write it in the first place. He was a science communicator, and we knew each other from science communicating circles. And it was just a whole big community built around Ola that I was a part of. And Ola decided to write this communications manual for scientists, knowing that we do sometimes have trouble communicating. He wrote that with a friend of his, Sarang Park, but Sarang at some point decided to go and study medicine. And as you probably know or imagine, if you go off and study medicine, you tend to have very little time for anything else. And so Ola was stuck with this kind of half-done book and called me and said, "Would you like to join the project so we can actually, push it forward?" And we were writing. It was such a lovely process. We're on Zoom every other week discussing the chapters and our ideas and everything. It was really good, really moving forward. And then in December 2023, Ulla died. And it was very unexpected. He had a heart attack and died, uh, and we were left with this half-orphaned book, and it was horrible also because when we were going through the manual, because even though it's an academic book, it's written in a very conversational tone, and I could hear his voice when I was reading through it, and I could, of course, see the comments that were there added on the day that he died, and it was
Mm,
just really, really raw.
mm,
But I managed to get a hold of Sarang, dig her out from her medical school, and we decided that we do want to finish this project. We want to put Ola's name on his last book, and it was really important to us. And we were also um, building and building on an existing science communicators community that we had access through because of Ola's network. So um, it was very much a collaborative project, and I'm so proud that we managed to make it work because
yeah.
it just meant a lot to us. And it showed that it's really important to emphasize relationships. And when people knew that we were trying to make this project happen, even though Ula's not there, they would give us different wonderful tips and interviews
Mm,
and one person did the illustrations for us, all because they knew Ula and they loved him as much as we did. So it
yeah.
was a very lovely project in sad circumstances, but I think it's
Yeah.
worthwhile what happened out of it.
Definitely. I mean, it does sound like it must have been quite challenging at the same time, but
Mm.
also more purposeful, right?
Yes, yes,
To
yes, for
complete the
sure.
book. Um, so that's an amazing story, and it's you must have learned so much from the community as well that you were working with, because you mentioned relationships. I mean, communicating in multifaceted relationships all the time, whether it's professions or whether it's family, etc. So based on your experience in relation to sort of like science communication, what do you think are the fundamentals of good communication?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it all boils down to one thing, which is that for every sort of communication, there's a sender, a receiver, and a message. Yeah. And so the sender's job is to pass the message to the receiver. And along the way, there's noise and distraction, and this is what hampers the understanding of the message. But these are the basic components.
Mhm,
Um, and the sender, as they send the message, they have some sort of a purpose with that message. And once you realize who is the sender, who is the receiver, what is the message, what is the purpose, and what might be the obstacles in the way, then you're golden. And so every time I do any sort of workshop on communication, on public engagement, on networking, on writing, it all boils down to that very same thing. Why are you doing this? What is your purpose? Who is your audience?
mhm,
How will you approach them? What might get in your way? What sort of, constraints you have? Are you going to be in a crowded room, or are you going to be online where half the people might be in a different time zone? What are the constraints?
mhm.
And on the basis of that, you can tailor any sort of communication to match your purpose.
Yeah, so that was actually going to be one of my questions.
Mhm.
Does the topic of discussion influence how you communicate, or would you always apply these same fundamentals regardless of what it is you're communicating?
I think you always need to know what it is that you're trying to say,
Mm,
and you always need to know who your audience is.
mm,
Very often, you see politicians who are being asked a question,
mhm,
and they talk and they
mhm.
talk and they talk and they talk, and words come out of their mouth, and
Yeah,
then you think, what
yeah,
was said?
yeah,
How come so much has been said and there's no content?
yeah,
So if you don't know what you're trying to say, don't expect others to hear it. I think it's that simple, regardless of whether you're talking about physics or
yeah.
history or public relations.
Mm,
All of that has to have a purpose, and your message has to be tailored to your audience.
yeah,
And I think something which a lot of experts forget about is that it is their job to make their message clear. It is
yeah.
not the receiver's job to
Mm,
untangle all the complications that they have thrown their way.
yeah,
Because um, in the end, all you can expect from your audience is a little bit of time and a little bit of goodwill, and that's it. they're not there to play detective for you. And in fact, I was talking about this to a journalist who turns out is really into baseball. And apparently, if you have a fielding error in baseball, and I think I'm getting it right, I don't know that much about baseball, but he said that in a fielding error, there's a thrower and a catcher. And if the catcher doesn't catch, the error is linked to the thrower. Because you
Mhm.
should have thrown it
Mm.
right for the other person to catch and
Yeah.
not, thrown it everywhere and expecting everybody else to run after the ball. So it's exactly the same
Yeah.
phenomenon. You have to throw the message well in the right direction.
Yeah, so that's something that I learned quite recently, actually. I was writing my research design for my MBA,
Yeah.
and I had to submit it for ethics approval.
Oh, yes.
And I was writing with the perspective that the ethics team would know what I'm talking about
Mm.
because they must see so many research projects. But the guidance we were given was write it in layman terms,
Yeah.
write it as if they don't know the topic at all, even if you'd think they do. And that was actually quite a challenge in itself. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, so it's a fine line to be simple but not overly simplistic. So think
Mm,
about David Attenborough as a communicator. He is fantastic because you can understand and follow everything that he is saying, but you don't feel patronized because you
mm,
have to, keep it very basic and then scaffold it up. Um, but you can't make it seem like the audience are children, unless they are children, then that's fine. But your ethics committee probably wouldn't. Yeah. So
yeah.
so so make sure you explain everything, and then build on that explanation,
Yeah.
because you also don't want to leave the audience going, well, I knew all of this already. What's so special about this project? If it's so basic, why are you even doing it? So don't
Yeah.
forget the kind of innovative bit. And I think what we need to remember, especially when there are experts giving talks, is that your goal as a speaker is to make the audience feel smart. And
Mhm,
they will feel smart when you start at the beginning
mhm,
and then you build a whole narrative and then you explain more and more. And at the end of the talk, they will be very pleased that they now understand quantum computing or whatever it is that you're trying
mm,
to present to them. Whereas
mm,
if you do it the other way around, if you don't focus on your audience, but you focus on yourself, presenting yourself as the most smart and eloquent person in the room, uh, if you use the biggest words and the most complicated jargon, that leaves the audience feeling very little and very stupid, and it's not a
mm,
good feeling to be left with. And the audience, instead of loving you for providing them with new knowledge,
mm,
they will hate you for
mm,
making them feel so
mm,
inadequate
mm,
and bored,
mm.
probably.
Uh,
So yeah,
Yeah, that's really interesting because there's another sort of element I'm thinking whilst you're answering this is you mentioned about not coming across patronizing.
mhm.
Now, if you are an expert, you're in a lot of cases, especially with scientists, I think, you're very passionate about your subject.
Yeah.
And you can go on for ages just talking about it. And you sometimes can get lost in your own message, I guess, or your own thoughts. So any tips on how you would balance that? And I guess what I'm thinking is, I'm imagining being in front of an audience and talking about the subject I know very well, but then remembering that I need to pull back. What am I trying to do here? What am I trying to achieve here?
Yes, I think it's realizing what the fact that who your audience is would dictate the structure of your talk.
Mhm,
Because normally in any sort of maybe conference paper presentation, you have the what it is that you're doing, why is it worth doing, what have you done, so the methods, and then what results you obtained.
mhm,
And when you go to a conference where you talk with your peers who know the area in and out, and they don't need the big picture of why it is that you're doing it or what it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
They mainly are interested in the methods and the results. Yeah. Whereas if you talk to a broader audience, you really need to shift the emphasis onto the why and the what. So, what it is that you do, and why is it interesting, and why is it relevant to you
Mm.
and
Mm.
to them? And it doesn't have to be directly applicable. You don't have to, with every single piece of research, discover a new drug for cancer, but show why it is that anyone should care. Why is it that you have spent years and years of your life on this topic and not on something completely different? So show the passion, but not by funneling into your methods and results section, but rather the bigger picture first. The
Yeah.
results, of course, are important, but the emphasis needs to be on the big why and the what.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, and the
Is
benefit.
that your
Yeah,
experience as well? What do you reckon?
yeah, definitely. I mean, again, coming back to sort of more recent experience. I mean, I'm in the sort of like the clinical trials field, where you've got, I guess, pharma or are interested in understanding more about a particular drug. So there's lots of sort of research or protocols that I have to review. And as part of that, there is heavy sections around how you're going to collect the data and how you're going to analyze the results. But ultimately, it's about the end point.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's about have you, I guess, answered the original research question that you set out to do, and that's what matters.
Yeah.
And that's what then guides what you do next. So yeah, it's very much relatable, I think,
Mhm.
to what you've said. I want to sort of change the question slightly now, to more to you mentioned like the classic methods of the I think I read in your book you're referring to the Shannon Weaver model,
Yes. Yeah.
in terms of the sender and the receiver.
Mhm.
I'm really intrigued as to, based on your experience, do you think the way we communicate in the modern era with the advent of digital technology and AI, has it changed? And if so, does that sort of like make the old ancient models redundant?
Mm, yes and no. So I think, yes, the way that we communicate has changed, but that does not mean that the classical models are obsolete. So what do I mean by the fact that our communication has changed? Maybe not so much the formal communications, writing reports or giving talks or lectures or presentations. That's kind of, it's based around the same principles. But the way we interact on a daily basis with each other, a large part of it is done online.
Mm,
I think social media has definitely had a huge impact on how we communicate and who we communicate with.
mm,
And also, depending on how friendly you are with your chat GPT, there might be a lot of communication there, not just for purely practical purposes, but also
yeah,
social ones as well. But
yeah,
I think because we live in an increasingly polarized environment, because we tend to surround ourselves with people that we share views with,
mm,
we find it more and more uncomfortable when we encounter someone that we don't agree with, and we don't know what to do in that situation. And very often the first reaction is to be hostile, which is
mm,
not very productive.
mm,
But this is, I think, when it comes to the world's biggest problems, not just linked to communication, but just underlying everything, I would say loneliness and isolation is the biggest problem, because very often we find ourselves in our very own, very curated digital sphere,
mm,
where we get news that are fed to us on a feed that's unique to us. We don't
mm,
have shared experience because of that. So how often do you see a family on a couch and each one of them is holding a different device and they're
mm,
sitting together,
yeah,
but there's no shared experience because each one of them is interacting with a separate device in a separate way.
Mm,
And right now, there's such an emphasis on individualized learning, individualized work streams, all of that. I
mm,
mean, it's very convenient on a lot of levels, but
mm,
I think we need to very actively force ourselves to interact with real people who
mm,
will not just say, yes, you are the smartest person. Yes,
yeah.
your views are so wonderful. Look, we have so many other people who support you. They're
Mm,
just here on this part of social media.
mm,
And I think because of that, yes, the way that we do communicate has changed because we're not used to that discomfort of disagreeing with someone politely
mm.
and not making it the end of the world when you don't share the same views on absolutely everything.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's again something that I could really relate to. Probably
Mhm.
not in the way that you might think. I mean, I worked for an organization for a very long time, and I could only describe that as being. I use the word I use the word institutionalized,
Mhm.
because I sort of like developed my knowledge and my expertise around what we did there. And since I've left, I've realized actually, coming back to what you said about, you're being challenged.
Mhm.
You've been challenged about, "No, I'm not really sure whether I agree with that, or no, there's actually other ways, etc." And it comes back to the whole opening up those conversations and being more receptive to other
Mhm.
opinions. And I think just another thing that came to mind when you was talking was obviously COVID did really exacerbate this whole thing of isolation. What's your thoughts on, or what's your experience during that time in regards to the work that you do?
Oh my goodness, it was a very, very interesting time for me because that was the time when well, I just got a new academic job being senior lecturer in environmental science at Brunel University of London. That was 3 days a week, and the other two was doing communications and public engagement in Oxford in the Department of Pediatrics, where the biggest research group was the Oxford Vaccine Group. So
Oh,
you can
wow.
imagine doing 2 days a week communication on the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine in the time of pandemic was pretty full on.
Can imagine.
Also trying to do another job and looking after a small child. So it was definitely very, very intense. I mean, it was very exciting on some level. It was super interesting to see the whole process and how it develops and to be at the forefront
Mm,
of science. But at the same time, it was really exhausting. Another thing that we did was apart from, manning the inbox where all the journalists would contact us. So just to clarify, part of my job was in a team of 5 people to be the first port of call for journalists and other media queries that were linked to the vaccine. And we would be able to filter the queries and either respond to some of them straight away, or if we didn't know the answer to them, then we would go and kind of escalate this to someone in the lab. We had in our group some biologists, some immunologists, but also people not really related to biology, but who knew the projects very, very well. We had some social scientists who knew how to approach kind of more sociological queries. So it was a really nice team to work with. But also, we were very aware that the researchers who were in the lab could not be pushed into responding to emails from journalists all over the
mm,
world because they actually had the vaccines to make.
yeah.
So we were there kind of being the first buffer zone for them.
Hmm.
But apart from that, we would also do outreach events. They were all online because it was lockdowns.
Yeah.
But we would do these information sessions about the vaccine.
Mm,
And because I'm Polish and my first language is Polish, I would talk to the Polish community in the UK simply
mm,
because even though most of the Poles here would speak English very well, it might not be medical English. And if they wanted health related advice, they would probably go to sources back in Poland
Mm.
where the policy of rollout of the vaccine was slightly different, and so you had this mismatch of information from one country and the practices from another. And so we had arranged a series of meetings where it was myself, it was a GP, a virologist, a couple of other health professionals. We were all there, ready to answer questions. And it was really, really, really interesting, because the people whom we have met there would divide into three groups. And the first one were the ones who'd come with legitimate concerns. They would ask questions like, I have had cancer, can I take the vaccine? And I think this, perfectly legitimate question. You would have the medical doctor answer that, or say, you have to look at your history, and
Yeah.
but this it's a question that can be answerable.
Yeah.
Then we had the people who I called them the very confused but open-minded. So they would say things like, why is it that there are parts of chimpanzees in the vaccine? And I was like, okay, I can see how maybe some links of some information have
Ah,
merged together.
okay. Yeah.
Let me untangle this for
Okay.
you. Let me walk you through the process of how the vaccine is made, where the whole chimpanzee thing comes in, and
Mm.
let's clarify.
Mm.
And that's fine. You might think, oh, what sort of a question is that? But I think as long as people ask questions, that's okay with me. It's better that they ask questions than
Yeah.
they stay confused
More
for a long
information,
time.
the better,
Yeah,
really. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But then there were the third, the people in the third group, and they weren't there to get new knowledge. They were just there to have an opinion, and that opinion was largely based around the fact that I was supposedly corrupt, and we were all being paid off by Big Pharma, and
Wow.
Bill
Okay. Yep.
had us in his pocket.
Mm.
Shucks, he never paid us. I don't know, that check just never came through. I was hoping to buy myself a yacht, but alas.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there were
Mm.
people who did not really want to learn anything new. They didn't really want to ask a particular questions. They were the kind of hecklers at the back,
Yeah.
and they were quite disruptive. And it was a really interesting exercise in public engagement because my background is in ecology. So normally most of the public engagement that I would do would
Mhm.
be based around animals, and people love to hear about animals.
Yeah.
Usually you'd have to be very controversial to really get a negative reaction when you're talking about animals. But with vaccines, it was so different. So to me, it was an eye-opening
Yeah.
experience. And I think the most fundamental thing that I have learned is, first of all, you will never be able to convince everyone.
Yeah.
That's fine. And it just quit while you're ahead.
Yeah.
There are some efforts which you can put and some efforts which you won't.
Mhm.
The second thing is informing is really not the same as convincing. So you can put facts out there, but there is absolutely no guarantee that these facts will change people's minds. And I think this was me coming to terms with my own bias as a scientist, because scientists, as you probably well know, are trained using the scientific method. So as more facts appear, as more data is
Yeah.
collected,
Yeah.
we change our opinions, or
Mhm.
we change our models based on the information that's increasingly more available. This is how we
Yeah.
work. This is how we are
Yeah.
trained to do research.
Yeah.
But that's just scientists. We're only a slither of the society. Most of the society doesn't work like that. They want to hear a story. They want to hear a convincing argument. And also, a lot of the time, beliefs related to health are very strongly ingrained in a person.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so
Mm.
um, so always think about, when was the last time you have changed your own mind, and what did it take, and who did it take? Who do you trust enough to say, oh yeah, actually, I never thought about it that way. That's a really interesting point. I'll take that on board, rather than going, nah, you're wrong. Uh,
Mm.
how long is this process? Because it's not a quick, oh yeah, okay, oh, you've got more data. Okay, yeah, no, okay, fine. On board with that. Especially if it's something that kind of really touches you to the core and it's almost part of your identity. And it's so difficult to do that. And I think a lot of experts, and it can be scientists, but it can also be people in different political parties. It can be, well,
Mm,
people in general.
mm,
People have
mm,
opinions.
mm,
They very often think that if you repeat your opinions or the facts that you're backing your opinions with loudly enough
mm.
and quickly enough in somebody's face, it will change their mind. It will not.
No, it won't.
Nobody
Yeah.
changes their mind by
Yeah.
being yelled at and by
No.
being mocked. You have to give people space to do that. And you have
Yeah.
to, I think, more important than anything, listen to them. So listen why it is that they hold an opinion of a
Mm,
particular sort. And you know, don't laugh at their questions of why do vaccines have chimpanzees in them. Listen, why did they think that way, and maybe how you can work together
yeah.
on straightening out that narrative. So I think this is something that we could all do a little bit more of.
Yeah, and that's really fascinating, and I think there's lots of areas, especially like you said, so like when it comes to health, that these similar sort of discussions happen.
Mhm.
And I think just one thing that's come to mind is I think data is good. I would
Mhm.
say that as a scientist. But I also think it's recognizing the other influencing factors
Yeah, yeah.
that are creating that opinion in that individual or that group. So I'll give you an example. So
Mhm.
I mentioned earlier that I work in clinical trials. What I actually work in is real world studies. And there's an increased interest and demand for real world data
Mhm.
when it comes to pharma. And the reason being that there's so many confounding factors that would
Mhm.
influence the way, for example, a patient would react or even behave when taking certain drugs. And that is really valuable data,
Yeah.
but also helps you analyze and understand the bigger picture. So I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like knowing the message that you want to get out, but also understanding the kind of reactions you might get and the why you're getting those reactions, and then
Mhm.
putting it all and piecing it all together.
Yes.
It's a
Yes,
completely different
absolutely.
story, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, interesting. Um, just, I think we've sort of like talked about this already, but what would you say are your top hacks for communicating in general? So probably more towards like complex scenarios or.
Yeah. So there's a whole long list, and read
Okay.
my books is the top hack. But quick fixes, I would say, if you're making a presentation, put few things on the slide and make these things big. Because I'm one of those annoying persons who will sit in the front row and go, what is it? What? I
Yeah.
can't see. And if I can't see, then there's no way somebody else and
Yeah.
the rest
Yeah.
of the room will see it as well. And if people can't see something, they will be upset because they can't see it, because they feel like they're missing out on information and they're not listening to you. They're being focused on deciphering what's on your slide. If
Mm,
your slide is too busy, people will not listen to what you have to say because they will be reading the slide. So this is how you direct your audience's attention. Use what you absolutely have to have on the slide. Or if you have something complex, then make sure it appears sequentially, not all at the same time, so that you can direct the attention. So
mm,
that would be my hack number one. My hack number two is realizing that the audience is on your side. They're on your side. They didn't come there to trip you up. They
mhm.
didn't come to your talk to see you fail. I mean, if they wanted to see you fail, why would they? They would not pay for the ticket. That would be the
Of
biggest failure, right? Why would you make the effort to show up somewhere, buy the ticket, book the slot, and then wait for failure? No.
mhm,
So every time you have any sort of um, presentation, think about how these lovely people have made the effort to appear here to listen to what it is that you have to say. And isn't it so uplifting?
Yeah.
Which also means that if you trip up a little bit, if you forget what you're trying to say, it's no big deal because A, most of the time the audience doesn't even notice unless you make a huge deal out of it. So there's
Mm,
no point making a huge deal because,
mm,
just unnecessary distraction. Um, but also, it's kind of okay to say, oh, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. Let me just check my notes. Oh, here we are. We're back. It's all good. Only takes 3 seconds. The audience knows that you have overcome your little hurdle and you can
mm,
move on. Similarly, if you have something that's distracting, um, acknowledge it. So in stand-up comedy, this is called calling the room. So, for instance, if you imagine that I have a very important talk, but just as I was walking on stage, I spilled coffee all over my white top.
mm, mm.
Um, I could go in and pretend like nothing has happened, but the audience will look at my top and will go, does she know that there's a big stain here? Does she realize? Does she not realize? Should somebody tell her? And of course, that stain is going to be a bigger distraction
Yeah.
than anything else in the room, and they're no longer listening to what I have to say because they're looking at my stain. So in a case like that, just say, look, I'm so sorry. I've spilled coffee on myself. Yeah, being a bit messy today. I apologize. Let's focus on the talk. Or, if there's I don't know, a leaf blower in front of the window, don't try to pretend that it doesn't exist. It's noisy. Everybody can hear it.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
say, look, we're going to take a 2-minute break. Let the leaf blower go away and then continue because
Yeah.
I think some people
Yeah.
just soldier through and think that it's better this way. It's not. Just
Mm,
acknowledge the fact that we're all humans and we have our needs and we
yeah.
are distracted easily.
Yeah, I think, I've spoken to quite a few people who have had to do, for example, public speaking, and there's so much fear around it. And it's probably that the fear is probably coming from whatever you're thinking internally.
Mhm.
And maybe we need to learn from what you've just said is just be a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what
yeah.
it is, isn't it?
Just everybody's
Yeah.
on your side.
Yeah.
Nobody wants you to fail. I think just having that at the back of your head is very
Yeah.
liberating. It's like I've seen somebody say once, people think um, less and better about you than what you expect.
Yeah.
People don't think about you all the time, and if they
Yeah.
do, it's probably okay.
Yeah.
They don't spend days hating you for whatever.
Yes. Exactly.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so just get over yourself.
Yeah.
Just relax.
I mean, if we take on all of the other tips you mentioned about communication, it's not really about what you look like or what's around you, it's what you're saying. And as
Yeah,
long as that's effective, then, you've done the job, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think we've talked quite a bit actually, which is really
Yes, we have.
interesting, and I've loved the conversation. I think let's finish off with one last conversation,
Mhm.
one last question. Um, how has your own communication style evolved over your career with all of the lessons that you've learned, and what key lessons guide you personally?
Okay. So for me personally, my best teachers are my students.
Hmm.
Because so I work with students quite a lot, less with undergraduate students now, mainly with postgraduates, and I do miss the undergrads because they're so unforgiving. So there are so many people who go, oh, young people these days, they can't focus on
Mm, mm,
anything, they have the
mm.
attention span of a fly. Well, so what? If they have the attention span of a fly, that means I have to be entertaining enough to make sure that they come to my classes.
Yeah.
So, knowing that there's a structure to my class that I want to keep it funny and I want to keep it engaging and I want to keep it amazing or in some ways unique ensures that students will come to that class. And so I can't afford to be boring. Whereas I think when I started off, when I was mainly doing research and less teaching, and I would present mainly at academic conferences, I could get away with being a bit boring because researchers are I wouldn't say they're happy to suffer, but they're maybe a little bit more patient about
Yeah,
and forgiving about the presentation skills, which are not really up to scratch.
yeah,
But yeah, the more you work with different audiences and not just your students, but broader audiences who don't have to be there because they didn't pay the conference fee and they're not
yeah.
sitting there because their boss wants them to sit there. They just happen to be walking along and stumbled into a place where some lady is talking about animals. If they don't like what I say, they'll leave. So knowing that your audience won't always be a captive audience really made me think about how to make any talk engaging. And I think, yeah, it's learning from these audiences that has been the most valuable thing.
Excellent. I've really enjoyed that conversation, Joanna. I think it was brilliant and some great insights to take away. So thank you so much, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nadia, for hosting. It was lovely to talk to you.
You too. So thank you everyone for listening. Very fascinating conversation. If you want to find out more about our coaches and our platform, please visit mentormeet.com. I've been Nadia Mahmood. Thank you very much. Goodbye.